Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Dodge this.
Welcome to the Holy Moment Podcast, episode 1 of season 2. Right? That's right. Last episode was episode 0, but now we're going into the season full swing, and we're starting with a banger. Or perhaps, I don't know how I would describe this, maybe not a banger.
Like a slow sleep in the night.
Yeah, it's more contemplative than a bang. It's maybe a sizzle. Right. We're talking about.
Have you ever dropped a piece of foam on the ground? That's the equivalent of this movie.
Yeah. Explain that metaphor more. I don't know if.
So you know when you go to the movies, when you go see Mission Impossible, when you go see Star Wars, King Kong, you're like, the movie was a bang, it was a ruckus, like dynamite exploding, if you will. But when you watch this movie, it's like someone took a piece of memory foam and they dropped it on carpet, and it made no noise and no sound. And that is the deep explanation I'm going to give you.
I am looking forward to dissecting that thought.
No, don't hold me accountable of my opening thought.
But, that just, it makes me, I'm reminded that I haven't even introduced this yet. Yeah, welcome to the Holy Moment Podcast, where we watch movies with you and discuss the moments that work, the moments that don't, and the moments that reflect truth in unexpected ways. Right? Did this movie reflect truth in unexpected ways to you, Nathaniel?
You know, I unfortunately have to say yes. Gosh dang it. Vega's left this podcast, but he will forever leave his impression on us. I loved this movie and I hated this movie, and it spoke truth and it spoke lies and it twisted reality. It did everything a movie should do and nothing a movie should do. And I was confused and bored and interested. I was everything. There was a lot going on with this. So I'm excited to jump into it.
Yeah, it reads more like a diary entry than it does a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we have a whole category for this season being biopic, but this was Vega's pick, which ended up being not even like kind of an autobiography snippet of someone's life.
Yeah, so this movie is called An Oversimplification of Her Beauty, right? And for some context, in 2006, Terrance Nance, the director of this movie, also the editor and the writer and its leading star, was stood up by a girl that he was in love with at the time. And this was simply a misunderstanding, right? But it had happened after a very rough day, right? And it caused him to reflect not only on that moment, but on his relationship with this woman. And it inspired him to create a short film called How Would You Feel? And this short film is basically a reenactment of that moment. He has her star in it alongside him, and using a narrator, he invites the audience into his experience, saying, how would you feel if these set of circumstances had happened to you, and you were this kind of person with these kinds of relationships and these kinds of insecurities, right? How would you feel? He then proceeded to screen that short film, that very personal short film, to her and to 100 other people.
What a baller move.
And it was presented as fiction, but she knew and her friends knew and he knew. And in the aftermath of that screening, this is a 40-minute short film, he decided that wasn't enough, right? He still wanted to work on it. And he still wanted to reflect on his and her relationship. And that desire to add on to led to the creation of this movie, An Oversimplification of Her Beauty. It's essentially that short film interspersed with later commentary, right? Dissecting his actions and her actions and self-critiquing and analyzing. In fact, this movie is 98% narration. We don't really hear a lot of dialogue. And it is very documentary, right? We see interviews and we see reenactments and very vulnerable thoughts, right? And so that's what this movie is. Yeah, like I said before, more a stream of conscious diary entry than it is a movie. And so with that being said, this is a very different film from your conventional film. And this is actually his first time writing a screenplay. Does that read? And does that add to or detract from what the film became?
This movie was too different and foreign and experimental for me to know or not know if this was a new filmmaker. Because, and this is a big topic I want to talk about. To our fans of the Holy Moment podcast who love us talking about your classic blockbusters like Tangled and Sinners and The Mummy, if you like us talking about archetypes and big explosions, this is not going to be the episode for you, because this is one of those movies that you use the movie as a lens to reflect upon your own life. So I feel like this episode is going to get really personal and talk more about what does it mean to be a human and to exist, rather than, oh, look at this cool story and what this character did. That was so crazy. So I have to say that kind of as a means of foundation of how I'm going to talk about this movie, which is what I always love from Vega. You never know what he's going to hit you with, but you always know it's going to be from like far left field, and you never know what he's going to throw you. Is he going to throw you a straight ball, a curve ball? If he's going to punch you in the face from behind, you just don't know what his picks are going to be. And so for this one, it being, just what Jeffrey explained, a very non-conventional, non-linear, kind of just like a stream of, I love stream of consciousness. Like he threw up everything onto a page and it didn't have to be perfect. So for that reason, no, I couldn't tell if he was a seasoned writer or a new writer. There were some things that could tee you up to that he wasn't, like, in my opinion, a phenomenal writer. And also the fact that it was so personal, it didn't have to be phenomenal writing because it was kind of his own gut reactions to his own life story. And so for those reasons, yeah, it wasn't like, this is an amazing creation. Was it kind of like Tarantino with Reservoir Dogs? It was his first film ever and he knocked it out of the park? Or is he Aaron Sorkin and been writing for years and decades and he's been doing amazing? It didn't matter because that wasn't the point of the movie. I guess some of its naivety, some of Terrence's ignorance as a first-time writer and director can be seen in some of his choices, but ultimately it's so personable, it's so vulnerable that, again, I don't care if he's directed before. It didn't detract necessarily from the story he was trying to tell. It reminds me of another documentary. Gosh, I cannot remember the name off of the top of my head. I also watched it on Christopher Vega's suggestion. Freaking saddest documentary ever. I think it was like something, Dear Zachary, letters from this father or something. I won't go too much into it, but it's a documentary about a murder. It's super depressing, but it's a guy who wants to be a filmmaker, but he hasn't, so it's an actual person and he wants to pursue film, but he hasn't made a lot of film beforehand. And how he creates his documentary, I could say sometimes might even be manipulative, but the subject matter was so personable to him, so raw. I wasn't frustrated that it's like, oh, well, you didn't maintain these great ethics when making this story, or you maybe use these editing techniques to really force an opinion on maybe this idea that should be more objective. It didn't matter because, again, it was so personal to his story. He gets to tell it how he wants to tell it. Sorry, that was a really long ramble. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. I think he is aware of that. I think he's aware of how he has manipulated the narrative, albeit I think it's unintentional, right? I think that he is telling this tale honestly, as in it's honest to his experience, but he makes no claim to being a reliable narrator. And I think he opens himself up for criticism. I think he even acknowledges that sometimes he is overly sure of his thoughts and his interpretations of his experiences, right? I think one big moment is when he's reading a book, and it reminds him of this friend of his that he is in love with. And he has her read this, and it's meant to be reflective of her character and her motivations, right? She reads it, and then she says at the end, I don't really relate to this at all, right? I don't see myself in this. And I think that's an early admission that the story that he is telling is an incomplete one.
It's so interesting. The word honest and truth and story. I feel like in this day and age, it's somewhat been warped. So I always feel weird when I'm like, oh, he's talking his truth. He's expressing his own story. I feel like it has so much more connotation in this day and age when it doesn't need to. But I think what makes this film so interesting is this director, this person is telling something that, like you said, Jeffrey, it doesn't have to be the correct perspective. It is simply his way he experienced these emotions. That doesn't mean they have to be good, doesn't mean they have to be correct, doesn't mean they have to be the truth. It is just simply how he experienced them. And as we as humans, I think we can all relate to that. No one really gets the truth of a conversation. I feel like it's always hard to fully convey your just like how I'm talking to Jeffrey right now. Me trying to convey this thought to Jeffrey is going to be lost in translation at some point. There is no true knowing one another. We're not aliens that can read each other's minds, and I don't think there's anything true as a full empath that can just take on the emotions of other people fully and truly. We will never be able to walk one step, let alone a mile, in someone else's shoes fully. Now we can be considerate and have empathy for people, and definitely can relate to people. That's 100% true. But I liked that he wore it on his sleeves. This is how I interpreted this. This is how I felt about it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. But this is just how I am feeling about it. Here it is to the cosmos. Do what you want with it. And I do appreciate, like what you said, he really did open himself up for criticism. I think a lot of people could argue that they're both pretty unhealthy, unfair people. But I appreciate at the end of the day, he's like, I don't know what to do with this. All I know is that I'm feeling these emotions and I need to put it into something. And that just so happened to be a movie.
I think one of the themes too of this is right now he is bearing his heart to the audience, right? He is letting us know what was on his mind, how he felt about specific moments in his and her relationship. But if he had told her these things, perhaps he would not be where he is today. Perhaps they would not be where they are in their relationship, which, by the end of the film, they're just friends. He interviews her after having screened that initial short film, and he asks her, hey, like, what were your thoughts on this? And she expresses, I mean, I don't know, it was a bit jarring seeing this story told exclusively from your point of view, because this isn't necessarily how I experienced it. I do kind of wish that you had talked to me about these things prior, maybe asked for my input before airing it before this large audience. And, he repeatedly talks about how he has a hard time telling people, I love you, right? And being honest with them, right? And open. He feigns ambivalence to create an image that perhaps isn't true to his heart. And so we cannot truly enter into someone else's inner world, like completely, but we can make an honest effort at honest contact. And one of his biggest regrets is that he did not do that sooner with the people that mattered to him.
Something that I also really love about this movie is I think it tells us so much about storytelling, because again, usually I actually feel a little bit uncomfortable analyzing these characters because these aren't characters. Terrence and Namik are real people. This doesn't feel embellished. It doesn't feel like it's based on original content. This is real. These are these real people's emotions and what they went through, and they put it on the screen. So I do feel a little awkward being like, well, actually, I think Terrence is wrong for these reasons, or Namik is wrong for these reasons. I'm going to give my opinion later on, but I do feel a little bit awkward feeling like these are real people. But what I do like about this and how this could be a study for like more narrative, more traditional film, in the sense of we often can critique storytelling in the sense of, well, that didn't feel real. That came too easily. That storyline didn't feel wrapped up. It wasn't in a nice, pretty bow. But often, like with this movie, there was no pretty bow. This was a guy who was obsessing over a girl in an unhealthy way, and there wasn't really a conclusion. He didn't by the end of the movie have some epiphany of like, I've been kind of unhealthy. I need to move on with my life. He kind of was weirdly, kind of vaguely in the same position he was at the beginning of the film. Not to say it was fully cyclical, but there wasn't character progression because he wasn't a character, he was a real person. And so it just goes to show that, like, with stories, we as humans don't actually always want the truth. This was a super muddy, gray area. Sometimes he would say one thing and then say another thing that contradicted itself. It was, for lack of better words, it's real. I mean, obviously, I hope, I don't know, again, these are real people, but I hope most people are more healthy than Terrence and Namik, because I do not label these as healthy people. But I do label them as people. They are confused. They are muddy. They are awkward. They don't say what they want to say because they're fearful. But it's just interesting that that doesn't translate always very well into cinema. We want components of real people in cinema, but we don't want an honest, truthful story all the time. We want the embellishments. We want the happy endings. We want the full circle, final end story conclusion. So, all that to be said, a big component of what I really loved about this movie was it reminded me of the power of film. I know that sounds really douchey and artsy, but hear me out, guys. All I'm saying is film is just turning on a camera and it capturing 24 frames in a second and they're played back. That's all that film is. It's what you want to do with that medium that makes it powerful. And I do think there are medium specificity. There are things that work better for film than things than like music or poetry or art. But just because it works better doesn't mean that it has to be done that way. So we found out that people will pay billions of dollars to watch a 3-act structure with a hero and an evil bad guy and they're fighting and then the good guy wins at the end of the day. And we have some pretty cinematography. That is how we've learned to use film. That's what we come used to it. But what I loved about this movie, even though I had some issues with it, it reminded me that film can be so much more, and not so much more in the sense of better. Like, oh, the Transformer movies are bad. No, I love the Transformers movies. But we can take a camera and tell a very honest story that is muddled and confused, and that is as much film as The Matrix is film. Again, I'm not trying to be too high artsy and fartsy of like, what is art? But all I'm saying is this movie reminded me of, oh, you can do pretty much anything with a camera. It doesn't have to be what is standard in Hollywood. You can tell your own stories how you want to tell your stories. And I thought that was refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about this film is it feels like a melding of mediums to me.
Yeah.
Because it is very much a movie, right? With visual storytelling and we're using a camera to capture real moments. But again, 98% of it is done through narration, right? Which we typically don't see in film. We're typically advised against heavy narration because it distracts from the visual communication element of it. And so this feels like a melding of film, the audio-visual medium, and prose, right? Which really excels at getting deep into the inner lives of characters and hearing the thoughts that aren't expressed visually. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, it did feel like a combination of multiple mediums, which is film in general. It's visual, it's audio, it's like auditorial. But it felt even more like that because it felt almost like slam poetry over a slideshow of pictures and sometimes images and video. So it very much did feel like a combination of different mediums to strike this emotion. And also something we haven't talked about at all, 50% of the movie is animated. And multiple types of animation style, kind of like how Spider-Man Into the Introverse is like kind of different types of animation, but even more jarring, even more striking.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Speaking of the melding of genres, or mediums rather, Terrance Nance also composed for this film. He is a musician, right? And because of his lack of experience in screenplay writing, when he was figuring out how to write this film, he wrote it as he would write a song. Verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Do you see that? Like, how do you make sense? I see it a bit, where we're seeing different parts of his life and then returning to a common theme of perception and reflection and love and relationships.
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard one. I did know that he's mostly a musician. Like, I don't know how much he's pursuing a film lifestyle. I think he's like a musician first and foremost, and they composed for it. But it's an interesting idea to approach a film like a song where it's verse, chorus. I guess I kind of see it. Like, it definitely did and didn't follow a 3-act structure. It felt very loose. I would say it felt like an echo chamber that revealed more and more. It felt like this idea, because again, the short film, which is like the beginning of the movie, and then the movie starts to like talk about the short film, is kind of odd. The short film exists, and it was a really cool idea for a short film where it just brings up this concept of like, how would you feel if you were supposed to see someone you loved and then they didn't show up? But then it keeps saying this mantra of that same sentence, but it gives you more context. And then the really cool thing is it doesn't just give you more context. Well, how would you feel if this woman who you loved for 6 months and you've slept with each other sometime? So it's not just context, but it's context from different perspectives. So it would like build context, and then it would take that context and give you different versions of the same context. So in a weird way, it's like context inception of you build up an idea, you give context to it, and then you give new context to the context you just gave, which is a really cool concept, but it felt like an inner flowing of that. It felt like this echo chamber of here's one idea. I love this woman. Why doesn't she love me back? And then it reverberates and it gives new context of like, oh, I don't just love her and she's never loved me. It's more of an obsession. And it's an obsession maybe born out of this. And what does it even mean to love people? And so it's always reverberating around this one true core idea of like, I like this woman. She doesn't seem to like me back. What's going on? Why do I feel this way towards her? Why doesn't she feel this way towards me? And so it has this flow around one central idea that doesn't feel very classic to our normal narrative structure. There's no progression. A movie starts with a concept and then it progresses it and matures into a theme, into an idea, into a final story. But this is like, here's the idea and we're going to rotate around it inevitably forever with giving you new ideas, but never bringing it anywhere.
I think a large reason for that is because this is a feedback loop, right? He is not venturing outside of himself for these answers. Right. In an attempt at self-reflection, he has become so absorbed by his own thoughts that he's failing to recognize these memories he's mulling over so much that he's dissecting, he's analyzing, deconstructing, regretting. These memories have become distorted. His memory of the experience is not as the experience was. And if he were to reach out to Namik and ask her how she experienced it, if he were to open clearer lines of communication and speak honestly about her lens, that would give him more clarity than, again, that feedback loop that he's found himself in.
No, I agree. Also, I want to give just a bit more context to our audience for a minute. Like, I know we're getting into some like, I don't know, deeper things, but really all this movie is, it's discussing a feeling of, yeah, let me bring it to this context of, I think we can all relate to this. How it feels to be in love with someone else and them not in love with you, but then you go on this rabbit trail of this echo of like, why am I feeling these things towards them? What brought me to this point? Did I ever love them? Why don't they love me? Why am I even capable of love sometimes? So it starts off with this simple idea of like, oh, someone didn't show up. But then you dig a lot deeper of why is that such a big deal to you? Why can't you let that go? So really, and it's so much more than just I'm in love with someone and they're not in love with me. I think this movie digs into something a lot more deeper than that idea, because I think that's been covered a lot in film and just idea and story in general. But I think Terrence goes quite a bit deeper, which is what I kind of it talks about an idea that I'm really interested in talking about. And Jeffrey texted me last night after we watched the movie, and he was like, "What are your first thoughts?" And let me pull it up. I'm gonna read this exact text that I sent Jeffrey. Oh, let's see. Scroll down because I'm so cool and I have so many texts. I texted Jeffrey last night at 9:40. Jeffrey texted first impressions, and I replied, a lot of really cool ideas and a lot of bad executions. And I want to elaborate on that a little bit, Jeffrey. I actually regret texting that because I do agree. I think this movie has a lot of really cool concepts. And when I say usually movies have cool concepts. This isn't to have cool concepts. This has intriguing, real thoughts that I've had in my own life. And it's not that it was bad execution. It was that the conclusion and the lens that the director viewed it through, I disagree with on a personal level. So this director talked about things I have personally thought about love before that I've never really heard anyone else talk about besides me and my fiance. So I was really excited when he started talking about that's how love should be viewed. But then he ended up like not viewing it that way, which made me almost frustrated. And maybe why I said I think maybe Terrence and Namik's love and the relationship seemed personally pretty unhealthy. Again, I'm maybe there's not one way to love, but I think how they did it was not the best. Anyways, I don't remember what you asked or how you or what you even said, but I kind of went on a tangent. Oh yeah, I remember I was saying like giving context to the audience of like we're not going to discuss a whole lot of like the movie because the movie really is just this thought idea, and so we're just more entertaining the idea of loving someone and getting lost in your own obsession with love. All right, that's all.
No, I mean I think that makes sense. I think that he talks about lenses in the movie, and I think he admits to being a a prisoner of his own limited perception, right? He admits to things getting to him. He admits to him mulling over memories until they become distortions of distortions. And he admits that he is not always portraying things fairly. And I think the cool thing about this film is he is inviting us into that world, and from his insecurities, from his limited perception, and from his experiences and his reflections, we can learn something about ourselves, right? By empathizing with him, who has very bravely worn his whole self on his sleeve. I think he is inviting us to do something that he did not do himself, right, with Namik, and failing to consult her about the airing of that film, and portraying her in ways that she would personally object to, right, and not seeking that truth from her. In fact, later, when he's talking about the editing process and this absence that he experiences from her, he says that he starts to lose sight of who she is, with nothing but the editing process to remind him of her. Editing, though, is an act of interpretation, right? He only has his own thoughts, his own reflections, his own continuous editing and cherry picking to remember her by, right? And so what he is doing in making this film, in refusing to seek her lens honestly, he's oversimplifying her. I don't think he escapes from that, right? She mentions in one interview that she wants to make a movie from her own perspective, but that movie isn't forthcoming, right? It doesn't happen. And so he clearly says to the audience, I took it in my own hands. I took her story into my own hands. And here's a trailer for it now, rather than letting her tell her story. And even the interviews that he has with her, where he lets her speak, they only exist, they get absorbed into the larger narrative that he's creating. And so I think that something we can take from this story is, by exploring other people's lenses, we can learn more about ourselves and more about how our horizons can be expanded from honest contact, honest and vulnerable contact, something that he wasn't able to manage.
It's man, we're getting into like not a touchy subject, but a subject where I feel if I share my true opinions, I'll be shunned by some people. I don't know how much I agree. Like, it's so hard. And this is why I have such a hard time with Vegas picks, because I watch them and I have such guttural reactions to this is right, this is wrong. And I don't want to be that person. Hear me out. I have a moral compass. I know what I believe. I don't want to stick with it. But I want to be open to seeing things from other people's point of view, to understand, not agree, but understand where they're coming from. And I often realize and understand, and this is why I like film, this is what I want out of the podcast, to be pushed into not always changing my perspective, but understanding where other people are coming from. Because I don't do a good job of it. I see things black and white, and I make up my mind. So as soon as this movie ended, I tried really hard to see the positive in it, to say what I liked about the story, what I liked about how he used film to tell this interesting idea. But I had a hard time not walking away and just being like, these are childish, stupid people. And this is where I might lose some people. It was so, like, I get it. I appreciate Terrence being vulnerable. I appreciate him putting out this what I do consider to be art. And this it's hard. I've been in Terrence's shoes. I've been infatuated with someone. I've crafted narratives that never existed, and I would lay in bed hoping for a future that would never, ever come to be. And I think we're all guilty of it to some degree. But I think it's unhealthy and unfair, and sometimes we got to wake up and say, hey, get your crap together and realize this isn't happening, and move on, and don't relinquish and wallow in your own self-pity, which just sounds really harsh, and I'm not saying Terrence is doing all of that. But all that to be said, Jeffrey, I do appreciate you talking about seeing things from other people's perspectives and stretching our own, because I'm not good at it. I'm bad at it. I make up my mind. I decide what I believe, and then I harshly judge other people for not following suit. So I am not saying that I am the most empathetic person. And I like that about myself. I like that I know what I believe and think, but also I want to be the type of person that can see other people's points of views without coming in and saying, no, that's dumb. You're a childish baby. Be better. Because just like I was saying earlier, human beings are complicated. Like, who am I to sit here and say I'm perfect? I have so much going on inside that is not simply black and white. I do good, I do bad. There's so much gray and muck inside every human. And it's hard to transfer through all of that. But there was a part of me that was like, I appreciate that Terrence is being honest and he's like, hey, look, this is where I'm at. But what I didn't like was there didn't seem to any call to action like I'm going to better myself. And again, since this was such a vulnerable movie that was not a story, not characters, this is a real person, Terrence, and a real person, Namik, I have a hard time divorcing that fact. So I just sit there and be like, why aren't you guys doing this? This is what is healthy. This is what would be better. Stop fantasizing about what could be and what is not even. And that's what I was talking about earlier, how he brought up these concepts of like, I am making up a narrative that's never even existed and that I'm fantasizing about and obsessing over. I think that's an awesome concept. But then the fact that he never like did anything about it was frustrating to me.
I can't help personally coming away from the movie and learning about how I ought to behave in relationships, right? From his frankness, from his mistakes. But do I get the sense that he is going to learn from his own mistakes that he is so aware of? Not really. Again, it's that feedback loop of, I understand my faults. I'm going to think about these more. I'm not going to act, but I'm going to think about them. And yeah, I'm just sort of stuck in this place of insecurity and inaction.
Well, then, can I ask you a question? This being such like a raw, real movie, you know, often we can take away lessons, interpret themes that we want to better ourselves in movies, but this is like real. What did you take away with how Terrence interacted with love, the word, the idea, the theme, the concept? It becomes so muddled over these years. What does it mean to love someone? And I just being honest with with our audience, you know, I am engaged. I've been dating someone for now over 3 years, and we're going to be married soon, and I think like less than 40 days. And my concept of love has been stretched and changed over and over again. And to be honest with you, if I watched this movie 3 years ago before I started dating the person I'm dating now, I think I really would have resonated with it. I think I really would have loved the beauty in the poetry in this movie and the love that was in it. But I found it very hollow and fake. I found any time that Terrence tried to romanticize love, I found it to be the fakest form of love. Because I think we're so desperate in society to romance love. We're so desperate to have this big interaction, this overwhelming chemistry with someone that's going to leave us breathless. When I walk away on a bridge, I can't even look forward. I have to look at my feet. All these big sweeping gestures that are just huge emotions. I just no longer. I think they're components of love. Don't get me wrong. I don't think love is one simple idea. I think it's large and it covers a large amount of area. So I think those things can be love included. But I think we stop there as a society. We go so far as like, look at this crazy text someone sent me and the emotion behind it and these ooey gooey feelings. And I just don't think that's what at the center of love. I think those are the things that are revolving around love. And they're the really nice things, the cherry on the top, but they're not the cornerstone of love. So anyways, that was just kind of a rant. I wanted to ask you was, what did this film teach you, whether it's because Terrence did a good job or bad job with it, what love is?
I think that his affection for Namik was born out of ego. I think that his love for her was based solely on how she impacted him and how she made him feel and experience things. And it wasn't built so much upon a desire to support one another. She was a character in his love drama and not a flesh and blood person. And that perception carries into this film where she is, again, just a character in his love drama. As I mentioned before, even the moments where he interviews her for her frank thoughts on their situation, it just becomes absorbed in this larger narrative that he has control over. And it's about him. Now, that isn't to say that he is the sole problem here, but I think that he wants to be, he talks about this openly in the film, he wants to be perceived as a lover, as an artist, as someone who is tortured. And this self-perception, he equates to who he is, right? He says that who I am cannot be divorced from how I perceive myself. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think we have narratives that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and that influences how we act. Like, I'm going to do this because I'm this kind of person. I think he's just too imprisoned by his own self-perception and too absorbed with it, too obsessed with it. He is honestly more obsessed with himself than he is with Namik. That's how I read it.
He did seem to have a lot of an ego, like this tortured artist, woe is me, but I need to create that because it fuels me. Like this self-cyclical, ego-driven concept. And even his ideas of love are childish. What I do appreciate about Terrence is him trying to be honest throughout all of it. And it does seem like maybe he's searching for something. Like he's searching for like, hey, I'm not saying I'm doing things perfectly. I'm just a person trying to live. So he's searching for something, which I can appreciate and admire. But it does seem all to be fueled by this lens of, I want love to look a certain way.
Yeah, I feel like he wants love, but he doesn't really do the legwork towards establishing a real love. And that's the thing I love about this movie, is that he recognizes his faults and is so open with the audience about them, right? Even if we come away from the film thinking, man, this guy isn't really all that healthy. He has some things to work through. He knew that and still made this film anyway.
Yeah, he would be a really interesting it's kind of dangerous, trying to psychoanalyze and decide who a person is based off of one film. Obviously, he put a lot of himself into this film more than like the average film, but it is still a dangerous thing to make up your mind. So he would be a really interesting person to like hang out with. And I really do feel like he could be one of two people. He could be an honest artist who is a little misguided and confused, because aren't we all a little bit, who's trying to do his best and trying to speak truth into the world and be like, hey, this is what I'm going through. Anyone else resonate? What's going on out there? Or I feel like he could be an egocentric person who is like, this was my experience with love. I want to make this story. I want to, like you said, he's his own character and everyone else is kind of a bystander. Again, we're humans. We can't be boiled down to A and B and C. But he would be interesting to like, what are you like in real life?
Oh, for sure. And, I also wonder, too, how much he has changed since the release of this film, because this came out in 2012, right? Are he and Namik still friends? After this movie was released, it was so interesting. I looked up interviews, right, press interviews about the film, and he's being interviewed alongside Namik. She is along with him in these press tours, and you get multiple like questions and answers to the effect of, "Oh, like, are y'all together now?" It's like, no, we're just friends, right? But it must have been so awkward to be them in those moments, and I especially feel it must have been so awkward for Namik too. And she would make comments to the effect of, yeah, it is really interesting to have been a part of this narrative that I had really no control over. It's just really odd.
I'm curious why she stuck around. Was it like he's a good friend? And it also seemed like she had some interest in film, because she mentioned that she wanted to create her own film. So was she simply using this as like, this is a cool project? Did she do it because he's a friend and she just enjoys being around him? Was she just leading him on? Like why did she stick around to be a part of it for so long? Because we're kind of giving a lot of shade to Terrence and how he handled the relationship. But Namik, we know very little about her. Like, we know her through the eyes of Terrence, which I think is a bad version of Namik, to be honest, which, again, an oversimplification of her beauty, which I think is the point of it. But, she also seems very aloof. She also seems like the classic, I'm leading you on. I guess it's just like a different culture thing, but it's like, what the heck? Why are you dating another dude and then you're hanging out with this guy shirtless, cuddling, talking about how he wants to be in love with you? Like, what are you doing? Just such a huge disconnect in reality for me of like, what is Namik after? Is she just wanting this attention? I feel like it's okay to say in society, you shouldn't be dating someone and then sleeping with another guy in a bed. Granted, it's not sexual sleeping, but it is still shirtless. I'm in a bed sleeping with you. So it is just like, what is Namik's goal here? Does she just want attention? Is Terrence just like a nice placeholder that's always gonna, to reference How I Met Your Mother, is Terrence just the person always on Namik's hook to make her feel better about herself? Is she actually in love with Namik or Terrence, but like doesn't know how to get rid of this other? Like I just don't understand. Terrence, I kind of get. Namik, I don't get at all, but also it's part of it because we really don't get her perspective.
It's this thing he talks about how he feigns ambivalence to things, right? But he harbors all of these really intense emotions. I think that he endures a lot of things with a smile or with a look of indifference, thinking that that's how he is supposed to be, thinking that that's what's expected, right? This is what the situation calls for. And I wonder if that's also the case for her, right? Where it's like, okay, well, given the community that I hang out with, given the ideas that are popular in the circles around me, I should be indifferent to this. It should be fine for me to cuddle with him shirtless. And it shouldn't affect me as much as it is affecting me. And so I'm just going to put those feelings to the side and pretend that it doesn't bother me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess it's just such, like I said, I think the word for me is just such a huge disconnect. Like I really don't maybe to be honest with me, Jeffrey, it doesn't make sense because I just don't know how you get from point A to point B in her mind with her thinking. Again, we didn't hear her perspective. We only saw it through Terrence. So I'm doing her a disservice of being like, I don't really know if maybe even if Terrence, well, I mean, I know Terrence wasn't lying because he interviewed her and said, "You're in a relationship with a new guy, right?" She's like, "Yeah, it's going well. We're boyfriend, girlfriend." So like, I just personally cannot. Again, if it's a character written, I feel like there's some more hurdles you can jump through to make it work. But if it's a real person and you see that real person saying these real things, it's just like, I do not know where this person's coming from at all, period. You're just living in such a different world than me.
You know that video from the screening where like he's answering questions from the audience and one of them expresses, I believe that we should be moving away from monogamy and be more accepting of like open relationships and non-exclusive relationships. And Terrence is like, yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. I think that, again, the circles that they're running in, it's sort of in vogue to have those beliefs, right? And so, again, even if they're having these feelings of, this doesn't feel right to me, I feel like I should be pursuing something more or exclusive, but there's that social expectation of, I'm the cool guy that's fine with, the girl I like sleeping with someone else and then sleeping with me platonically, shirtless,
Yeah. I guess, yeah. I like I said earlier, I'm not great at seeing other people's perspectives, but when you put it through that lens, it does make more sense of like, this is what they're okay with. But it just makes everything so like, no wonder you're having such a hard time figuring out if you like her, don't like her, what she thinks of you. You set yourself up into this muddled kind of weird position.
It's this thing, I have thoughts on the idea of polyamory. I don't think it's healthy, personally, and I don't think it's really sustainable. I think that a lot of people that find themselves in polyamorous relationships, jealousy develops, but they feel they can't express that. Otherwise, I don't know, they're harshing on each other's vibes.
Yeah.
And I think that same hesitancy to be honest and vulnerable is present here, where I don't want to seem like regressive because I get the sense that, again, in the circles that they're running in, the idea of exclusive relationships is regressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Which makes why Vegas picks her so hard, because you dive into such touchy subjects. That it's like, I can see the art and beauty in some aspects, and then I wholeheartedly disagree in other aspects. And the issue is, you either do or don't like Indiana Jones, like there's no moral, political, religious stakes with liking Indiana Jones. It's either you find him fun or you don't find him fun like me. When you don't like one of Vega's movies, it makes you a bad person. It makes you like politically, morally horrible. And maybe that's like a little bit of an overstretch, which I love and appreciate about Vega's picks. They're so much harder to review because we know Vega. One of his favorite words is, "It's so human," which I miss him saying on the podcast a bunch. But he likes film that muddies the lines between fantasy narrative and real humans interacting with real situations. And it just becomes a lot harder of a conversation to have, which I think is important for us. The important things, we don't just tell fun stories. We tell stories because they mean something to us. And if we can't interact with real stories and real situations and real emotions and feelings, then there's really no point in telling a story. If it's just going to be a whole bunch of fluff and fun, which again, going back to last week, like I was saying, I think society is begging and wanting something real. Maybe not as real as Terrence. I keep wanting to call him Terrence Malick, who made Tree of Life.
Terrence Malick.
Yeah, I keep wanting to call him Terrence Malick, but it's not Terrance Nance. But maybe we don't always need movies as raw as an Oversimplification of Her Beauty. But again, I really do appreciate at the end of the day, he took film and said, no, I'm not doing anything wishy-washy, fun narrative. I am putting my own feelings and emotions and life into this movie. And I think that's something as a storyteller, even if I don't agree with everything, I can take away and really appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that from time to time it is really important to interact with movies like these that force us to grapple with our own feelings and beliefs and come to a stronger understanding of them. I have not moved away from my belief that I think, I do not think that monogamy is regressive, right?
Oh,
I
come
do
on,
not think.
Jeffrey. After this movie, you want to get into like a relationship with 4 other people.
No, I mean, the thing is, this movie shows me that this kind of life is deeply unsatisfying. I think it was a very valuable perspective, and it allows me to review my own beliefs and then come to a conclusion regarding, like, is this worth discarding? Or does this allow me to plant my feet more firmly where I stand?
Yeah. But which again, I think that's what it's like. That's what it's about being. I don't know about open-minded, but open to other perspectives. Just because you're open to other perspectives doesn't mean you have to take the other side. It just means, like you said, you can grow and you can make a decision, and maybe you decide more on what you believed or a little bit less. But it also helps you know where other people are coming from. And when you know more when other people are coming from, you can use that for good and for unity. You can use it, to harsh on people and make fun of them. But like, just because you don't agree with polyamorous, it doesn't mean this movie doesn't help you see a little more into their perspective on it. And that can help just further conversations. Again, it doesn't mean you have to now like agree with it, but it can still further conversations and be like, you're a person, I'm a person. Why do you do this? Why do I not? We don't have to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya at the end of the day, but we are human beings and we all, we're making decisions for a reason. Let's understand why instead of just, telling people to shut up and yell at them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this movie moves us to compassion and inviting us to empathize. It inspires us to look at people through a different lens, through the lens of they're individuals with their own experiences and sets of beliefs and circumstances and relationships, and that has formed them, right? And I can't dismiss them out of hand. I cannot make light of their experience. I cannot speak on their situation without acknowledging its complexity, right? And the subjective experiences of the person that I'm talking to. It's all important.
I would agree that this movie does a good job of asking yourself to like not just make up your mind. This movie does a good job of not giving you an answer. Again, it's not this classic narrative story, and it's also not trying to teach a lesson. It's more like throwing an emotion or question out there in the void, which makes it a great conversation starter, regardless, for friends, for families, for loved ones, for a podcast, because it's really just this echo in a chamber of, hey, this is what I'm going through. Is anyone else? I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not giving you a conclusion. I'm just throwing something at the wall, and you guys can talk about it. So I will agree with I agree with that idea. I know you're the host, so I don't want to take away from you, but I had 2 ideas I want to talk about really quick, which will pull us a little bit more back into the movie because I know we're getting so concept heavy of the themes. But 2 things you mentioned one of them earlier, Jeffrey, but 2 things that on a very film with a capital F thing that Terrence did was, like Jeffrey said, it's like 90% narration, and the editing is very, I would say, experimental. I can't remember the term for this or who came up with it, but Jeffrey, do you remember an editing class? Way back in the day, some guy discovered, hey, if I put a picture of a baby next to a picture of a plate of food, you invoke the emotion of hunger. If I put a picture of a baby next to a mother, you invoke the emotion of love. If I put a picture next to a baby and like a hammer, maybe you invoke the emotion of stress. But the point is, it's a very, very simple idea. When we started editing back in the day with film, you literally could mesh 2 images together and invoke a different emotion. And I feel like this is what this movie did with its editing style. It would just clash so many different visually striking things, so many narrative components to kind of arise this emotion. So a lot of the ways the editing felt really, really rudimentary. but also really impressive. What were your thoughts on the editing?
I'm trying to think of specific moments that demonstrate that. I find that sometimes the images on screen interact with and clash with the words being spoken by the narrator.
And to further express, I'm not saying that this movie did a one for one for that concept. Like maybe it did a lot of like imagery with like, here's a shot of this male and here's a shot of this other thing that evokes a specific emotion. So I'm not saying it's a one for one, but just like how he edited the film was very trippy, but also very like rudimentary. I mean, when they get into the animation, sometimes that stuff is pretty complicated, but I just feel like the editing techniques they used, they did so to evoke an emotion rather than necessarily tell a story. And obviously, evoking an emotion is part of telling a story. But I just thought they did a good job using imagery to provoke an emotion. And that motion didn't necessarily compel the story forward, but it was just like, here's an emotion here. And they did it in like really simple ways. It wasn't anything too complicated. Like sometimes love was just represented by a rose.
Oh, absolutely. I found the animations absolutely stunning. I particularly like the one where they're being portrayed as wooden dolls, right? And the rose and the thorn wraps around him and chokes him and causes him to bleed, right? And that's how he perceives that particular love. It is a very visceral image of this thing of beauty is also the cause of my misery.
I totally agree. I think that animation sequence of the puppets is probably my favorite sequence in the whole film. I thought it was because at that point it feels the most narrative. It feels the most like he's telling a story almost. So part of me was still grasping to put it into a more forward motion narrative, but that's just what this film wasn't. But I thought it also was some of the most striking visuals of the puppetry.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was stop motion, using actual physical, like tangible things, made it feel all the more real, right? More real than the 2D animations. I think that's why it stuck with me. Like the blood was wet and sticky in a way that that the 2D animation just couldn't express those realities in the same way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. What part of the animation that I didn't love was the whole like weird naked people growing big. Just that whole bit where he's kind of talking about his first love leaving him for a woman, and it felt like such a small man in that moment. There are certain points that seemed truthful, and there are certain points of the movie where Terrence felt very childish, complaining, and that felt like like that whole scene of him being a small, shriveled, naked man, and then this woman growing larger and being naked and picking up him and being like, "What is this? Who is this?" It just felt so. What's the word? Indulgence. Sometimes he felt so indulgence in himself and in big quotations, this is what art is. It felt a little too much on the nose and too much of an indulgence.
A lot of reviews that I saw online, both good and bad, called this movie self-indulgent.
Yeah.
So you're definitely onto something there. And I think, too, one thing I liked about those sequences is his expressing that, yeah, I mean, at the time, I thought that I played a bigger part in their minds and in their thought processes than I probably did. I was obsessing over them, and I felt that I was playing a part in their decision-making, but at that point, she had just fallen out of love with me. And that's an example of him acknowledging, yes, I do have an ego sometimes. Perhaps even a lot.
Just a bit, yeah. Yeah. What I found to be the most interesting and the most frustrating about this movie, and I talked a little bit about it earlier, but his awareness of how we in society view love and how we warp it and spin our own narratives. There were a lot of quotes that I really, really loved. One of them is my holy moment, so I won't go into that one. But one of the quotes that I liked is pretty early in the movie when Namik has her first monologue, when they're both in the art gallery and he notices her and she notices him. You know, we as women know when men are looking at us. We can feel it. We can tell. And a man will do one of two things when you notice. He'll either keep looking at you or he'll stop looking at you and walk away. And I like that it's this idea is a man can either have the courage to be like, I know what I want. You're a beautiful woman. I'm going to go talk to you. And not even just women, just things in general. This is a goal. This is an aspiration. I'm going to go do it. Or he also has the courage to be like, you know what? Nope, I'm going to walk away. I have the decision and the decisiveness to carry on with my life. I don't need you. But then she's like, a boy will look away and can look anywhere because wherever he decides to look, he's going to project you into that space and believe that you are there and then make believe whatever he wants you to be. And I love that concept. And I think it's so true what men often struggle with self projection and self narration of what women want and what women think. And it's super unfair to the females in your life of being like, well, this woman thinks this of me, or we could have this. And I think it's just a very dangerous route to go down. And I don't really hear people talking about this, talking about this men will self-project ideas of what women want and desire, and then will just fantasize and obsess over them, and then they'll create whole ideas of who women are and will enact on those decisions they've made. And we don't talk about that in society, and I love it. But then what makes me frustrated is even though he talked about this complicated idea, he didn't then agree with it. He then kept doing it. He then kept obsessing and kept warping and deciding what narratives and what truth and what the story was in his own eyes instead of talking to her, instead of having any type of real conversation. So in my opinion, it's not good enough to know your issue. You have to then enact, you have to do something about it. So I don't care if you're able to be like, oh, well, isn't it good enough that I realize that I actually have this issue? No, it's good enough when you start doing something about it. And maybe he was trying to make steps towards it, but that was one of my favorite parts of the movie, but also one of the parts that frustrated me so much.
For sure, yeah. I think that one of his problems is that, again, I think he's speaking honestly about how he experienced events. But I think he takes his subjective experience as truth in a more absolute sense. And I think he even admits to that as a fault early on when he says that I have too much assurance in my own thoughts. And that never changes. That never changes. Even by the end of the film. This is his narrative. This is his story. This is his perspective. And I think it just doesn't change.
Yeah. Well, which is interesting. Again, like, obviously, especially a movie that covers so much time. He's like, this relationship started like back in 2001 and then I'm making 2012. So it transgressed so much time. But again, it doesn't narratively have a conclusion. And it doesn't necessarily have a forward motion track. It is more an echo in the void of this is what I'm feeling. And again, maybe while it's not healthy, I do think it's a cool concept to put into a film.
But it's also interesting because, I mean, there is a sense in which no matter what he does, he cannot escape the fact that this is his narrative, right? He cannot ultimately go completely outside of himself. No matter what he does and no matter what he tries, he'll still be trapped behind his eyes. And that rhymes.
So therefore it's deep.
I mean, that doesn't mean that he can't, again, through honest contact with other people, experience what they're feeling and glean truth from it. That's just something that he hasn't really been doing, despite recognizing that as an issue.
We're all trapped within the lenses that we perceive the world until someone comes around and stretches our lens, which once again is why I want to be open to ways of viewing the world, but you also have to be careful. You can't just take everyone's perspective. You have to analyze it and go through it with your own morals and thoughts and decide if it makes sense or not.
I mean, that's the really cool thing about the central question of the film is like, how do you feel, right? And it begins with, how do you feel if these physical circumstances happened? But then it goes on to, how do you feel if you were this kind of person? Which is super interesting, and I think such a great exercise in empathy that you're inviting your audience to, right? How would you feel if you were not who you were? How would you feel if you had these specific faults and these specific desires and this specific upbringing? It's a very explicit but effective way of stretching our lenses.
Which I think just at the end of this episode, we have proven that you're much better at it than I am. You are. I am not someone who is able to do that easily.
Nathaniel, I love your brain. I love the way that you think. And I genuinely love the insights that you come to. And I think that's the really valuable thing about our different lenses, right? We each have our own set of unique experiences and feelings and thought patterns that we repeat to ourselves. But And me interacting with you and hearing your thoughts, that broadens my horizons, right? And I'd hope that in interacting with me and hearing what I have to say about things, that broadens your horizons.
That's very kind of you to say, and I agree. I think you broaden my horizons as well, and you stretch me in good ways. And one of the whole reasons we're doing the podcast, folks, is to stretch ourselves. Because you can very much tell that Nathaniel needs to be stretched in some areas, but I'm not going to be stretched. I'm not going to be Play-Doh. I'm going to be a stone. No. That is not true. I do think that Terrance Nance created a really evoking film. He used film and the imagery and audio to its strengths. And I think he did a lot of cool things. And I appreciate, I don't often use the term and love the idea of like his bravery to put this out there, but it takes a lot to put something as vulnerable, even if sometimes it was self-indulgent and arrogant, it still takes a lot to put something out there into the world to see what people think about it. So there were a lot of pros about this.
It is incredibly brave. That's one thing that I specifically took note of, is the reason we are able to so openly criticize Terrance Nance is because he has put this out there and has opened himself up to this criticism. And honestly, I thank him for it. I thank him for this work of art. I think that he's accomplished what he set out to do, and I think that I've been stretched.
Yeah. I definitely, it's always those movies that you don't think you're going to like, or even you don't like, that you find that you have the most conversations about, which is interesting as people. Like when we agree on something, there's not a lot to be said, but when we disagree, we talk so much about it. And even in that, we are stretched. So I would agree. I would fully agree that I have been stretched by Terrance's film and Oversimplification of Her Beauty. So for that, Vega, you won once again, making Nathaniel a more tolerant person.
I'm telling you, we have to make Vega's pick a consistent category, like across seasons.
You know, the sad thing is, I mean, who knows? Comment if this isn't true, but Vega's pick, I think, does great things for us in discussing film and film theory. I feel like the audience is like, no. Maybe, I hope not. I hope they enjoy us talking about this episode of this very meta movie.
I think After Sun really resonated with people.
That's true. Oh, After Sun was so good. Such a good movie.
Speaking of After Sun, I think that we have a little shout out to make at the end of this episode, but we're approaching that. We're approaching that because I think we've talked about enough for this episode, right?
Enough that you can for a movie like this.
Exactly. Like there's perhaps so much more that we could say, but with that being said, let's move on to holy moments.
No, my holy moment, I touched upon the theme, but I want to, there was a lot of quotes I wrote down. Again, really, really insightful quotes that my fiance were talking about. They were like, quotes out of context, I vibe with hard. Quotes in context, I'm like, wait, no, that's like the opposite of what I want it to be, which is kind of frustrating. But the quote that probably sums it up the best, I like the whole like where guys look, or the one I talked about earlier. I like that a lot. But the simple quote of, your dreams are so powerful, you miss something you never had. And again, just my favorite part of this movie easily was the concept of guys spinning false narratives of females because they're lonely, because they want to have some connection, because they're too fearful to talk, because they don't want to communicate. Our dreams, our desires, our projections of what we want people to be can be so powerful, they can literally rewrite how we view them, how we interact with them, and I'm real bad about it. I'm so guilty. You can just see a person on the street and you can decide their life story. You can decide if they're quiet, if they're loud, what they like, what they don't like, what kind of person they are at a party. And I did it in college to people I liked, and I'm very, I very much can be accused of it. And I think, again, in dating my fiance, it's really lifted my eyes to this idea of, we can make certain assumptions about people to some degree. And I'm not saying, nope, you can't make any assumption until you talk to them. I'm not saying that, but it's just be very careful with the narratives you spin. Talk to people, communicate with people, ask them. Terrance isn't going to know Nameek's perspective unless he actually asks her questions. And so for me, that's my holy moment, because I think that is such a big story in my own life that I've been going through for the past 3 years, to not spin these stories, to get to know people. And so I just love that quote.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent holy moment. And one thing I wrote in my notes for this movie, let me see if I can pull it up, is we are not expected to accept his narrative as strictly factual, as emotionally honest as it is. He is speaking truthfully about his experiences, but he acknowledges that he's a prisoner of his limited perception. He confesses that he lets things get to him. He admits to mulling over these experiences so much that they become distortions of distortions. Memories become fables. People become caricatures. Assumptions become fact. Assumptions become law. And what you said just reminded me of that. Just that he does not venture outside of himself. And so he gets locked into these perspectives that don't accurately reflect the whole truth. And so I think for my holy moment is just the vulnerability with which he approaches this. In wearing all of his flaws, his insecurities, his whole self on his sleeve, and inviting us to experience that with him. We learn not only about him, but we learn about ourselves, right? And about relationships, about what not to do, right? And about unhealthy attitudes. And so that's my holy moment, just the fact that he did not hide himself.
He didn't try to manipulate the perspective of what we saw him through. It might not have been the correct lens, but it was his lens of how he actually saw himself. So maybe we might meet him be very different, but it seemed like he was authentic of like, this is how I feel and think.
Yeah, this is how I feel and think. I make no pretense at being an objective observer. Perhaps how I approach things is manipulative, but it is honestly me. With that being said, let's rank these. This sucker.
Oh man, this is one of those hard movies. You know that documentary I was talking about earlier that kind of resembled the honestness of this movie that Vega also told me to do or watch. I don't often write reviews in Letterboxd, but I wrote a review and I was like, this is one of those movies that can't be ranked because it transcends what we normally do in filmmaking. It's not trying to just tell a fun little story, create an emotion. This is someone fully putting themselves on stage and being like, this is what I'm going through. And you kind of go through someone else's life through their eyes. And it's like, this isn't meant to be given a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Now, granted, I feel that much more strong about that other movie because of kind of the concept and what it touches upon. I feel less about this movie, but it's still kind of true about this movie. It's so hard to like rank it 1 through 5 when we're so used to reviewing, classical Hollywood movies.
It's like we're ranking Terrance Nance, right?
Yeah, it is kind of like garbage.
Like,
No,
I
I'm
give
kidding,
Terrance
I'm
Nance 3.5 stars. People can't really be, put into categories like that.
Yeah, there's a world in which I give this a 2, and there's a world in which I give it a 4. I give it a 4 in the sense of I feel like he was using the medium of film in such a unique way that's not always done, but that works to a degree differently, but it works just as much as like, big movies. But I give it a 2 because at the same time, it's not really a story. It's a diary. It's a memoir. It's a message to the cosmos of this is how I feel and time. And for that reason, I give it 2/4.
2/4. Okay.
Yep.
I think that's a solid answer. I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of steal your answer and then distort it and cut it down the middle. I'm gonna give it a 3.
Truly deep. We all have our own perceptions and lenses we view the world through, Jeffrey. That's funny.
Anyway, now that we've gotten to the end of this podcast, there are several things that we have to do. First things first, we have some people to shout out.
Oh, we do. I'm excited. Guys, we tell you, we'll interact with you. And today we had someone interact with us. Granted, it was a little while ago, but we're getting around to it today. We so often tell you to email us. Email us at theholymomentpodcast@gmail.com. And that's how we'll interact with you. But ultimately, we have a lot of social media. We have TikTok, we have YouTube, we have Instagram, we have Facebook. And we would be silly to not talk about the comments. Now, I can't talk about every single comment because some comments are just like, that man has a good mustache. So thank you for that person. But we have someone who has commented on 2 different videos and left really, really nice reviews and actually engaged with our content. I won't say his last name because I can't pronounce it. And also, maybe he doesn't want his last name to be said. But Fred, that's right, Fred, who has commented on 2 different YouTube videos. He commented on After Sun and The Mummy. We see you, and we appreciate you, Fred. The comment you left on After Sun is exactly why we are doing this. We get it. We're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but we're trying to engage in film and the way that makes sense to us, in a way that stretches us, in a way that is engaging to you guys. We're trying to have these conversations to make us better filmmakers. Guys, don't forget, Jeffrey and I want to be filmmakers. We are filmmakers. We're actors, we're directors, we're editors, we're writers. We're doing this. We want to do this to become better. So Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to type out your eloquent speech about After Sun, and then also to thank us for doing a second season, and to appreciate the time and energy we did on that skit for The Mummy. So Fred, tonight, on this night at 12:26 p.m., I thank you for giving us a listen. And if you do want to send us a little message at theholymomentpodcast@gmail.com, we'll praise you more even next week. So once again, thank you so much, Fred.
It's been such a light seeing those comments, and it really means a lot to us. We're pretty small, but seeing that someone has stuck with us for this long, hey, thank you.
We appreciate
Also,
it.
shout out to our friend Whit, too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we don't.
Whit has been.
I guess we kind of vaguely shouted out Whit because he sent us an email. But yeah, Whit, I've talked to Whit on the phone, and Whit is always willing to discuss the podcast and sing its praises, and then give me feedback when we need feedback. It's easy to overlook a friend because it's like, well, of course they're a friend. They're going to watch your podcast. Whit might be one of my only friends that watches my podcast, and I have more than one friend, I swear. So Whit, we see you and we love you.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, I guess it's time for us to figure out what we are watching for next week.
It feels like an eon since I've actually spun the wheel. Because, the week beforehand was Sinners, which we didn't spin the wheel. Mummy and Tangled, we didn't have to spin the wheel because they're both of our last picks. I'm so excited. Look, I'm looking at the wheel right now. 6 fresh picks. The horizon is the possibility. Nothing can get in our way. So I'm going to spin my wheel. But first, real quick, guys, let me just remind you what's going on here, considering we're a new season. Each season, we pick 6 categories, and we have some new categories for you guys. Let me tell you what we came up for this season. So, this season, we have Schwarzenegger. Pretty obvious. Schwarzenegger has to be in the movie. We have foreign film, creature feature, biopic, Vegas pick, which was Jeffrey's pick for this week, and then wild card. So I'm going to be honest with you. I hope Vegas pick and I hope foreign film don't get spun, because specifically foreign film. I think foreign film is going to be a gut punch of a movie. It's the movie called Come and See, and I just don't know if I have it within me to watch a gut punch of a movie. So without further ado, all right, it's slowing down. Oh, okay. It was this close, Jeffrey. It was this close to being on biopic of a movie I really want to watch, but we'll have to watch Steve Jobs later on. But guys, we're going to have fun next week, because guess what? We're watching Velocipaster, which is my creature feature. Shout out to our friend Erin. She's the one that got us all to watch it. She loves this movie. She's watched it dozens of times, and this is an amazing movie, guys. This is for everything we just watched this week, it is probably the antithesis of the movie we just watched. I mean, Velocipaster is as good as it gets. Go watch it, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, we should start doing a thing, Jeffrey. You remember in America's Got Talent, how you would have the gold buzzer, and if you did the gold buzzer, it was like, doesn't matter, you have to watch. They get in. We should do one pick of the season of your own spinning, where it's like, guys, come on. If I'm going to die on any hill, you need to watch this movie. I guess the only issue is we don't watch the movies beforehand, so we don't always know. I have seen Velocipaster before. I've seen it actually 5 times. I will die on this hill. Go watch Velocipaster. It's so good. It's a quick watch. It's so much fun. If you need any more encouragement, it has, non-ironically, the best sex scene that I've ever seen in a movie. Done chef kiss beautifully. So yeah, super excited to watch my creature feature pick, Velocipaster. I'm really torn. It was actually going to be The Thing, because I love The Thing, and it's a great feature.
I do too.
So good.
I thought about doing that too.
Yeah. Well, what did you do for years ago? Oh yeah, you did Gremlins.
So, okay, I'll be honest with you. I've been sort of caught between 2 movies, and I might change my creature feature, because it could be Gremlins, or it could be Snakes on a Plane.
Oh, I feel like Snakes on a Plane goes with the same vibe as Velocipaster. I'm not sure because I haven't seen Snakes on a Plane, but I feel like it's goofy like Velocipaster is.
Yeah, I get that sense too. So like, okay, which movie would you rather see?
I feel like I'd rather see Snakes on a Plane. I don't know anything about Gremlins, but they always creeped me out as a kid, and I always thought they were dumb. I will watch that movie happily, and I'll be stretched. But I would rather watch Snakes on a Plane. But
Me
maybe
too.
we should let
Okay.
people vote if anyone's listening.
Yeah, okay. So if anyone responds to this request for a vote, right? You might be the only person responding. And if you're the only person that responds, we will go with your pick.
That is beautiful. That's beautiful.
All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for this ride. For it has been a ride. If you want to check us out, we post reels, we post content on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You can find our podcasts at YouTube or Spotify. And again, our email, theholymomentpodcast@gmail.com. Send us some love or hate. Just send us something.
And you can find us on all those platforms under the username, The Holy Moment Podcast.
The Holy Moment Podcast.
The Holy
We also have a
Moment Podcast.
Letterboxd. We also have a Letterboxd that we don't really use.
I think that. I don't know whose responsibility that is. One day, we just started doing thumbnails for the podcast. Gosh darn it. It's one thing at a time. We can't do everything. Stick around, folks.
I might actually go to the Letterboxd page and upload my thoughts on an oversimplification of her beauty.
You should do it. Hear that, folks? Everything you've been waiting for. Jeffrey Nichols, a Letterboxd review of an oversimplification of her beauty. Foaming at the teeth.
Foaming at the teeth. I love that. Anyway, thanks, guys. We'll see you later.